John Dinkelman will discuss the journey across the desert taken by thousands of illegal immigrants who cross daily from the entry at Sasabe to Alter, Arizona. The entire process degrades from a large population transit area to the middle of the desert, where Mexicans try to connect with the coyotes who they hope will bring them to a better life. Dinkelman received a new post in summer 2007 at the U.S. Consulate in Nogales, Mexico, as a consul over U.S. and Mexican affairs for the northern half of the state of Sonora. He joined the Foreign Service Institute Orientation Division in 2001, where he served as Deputy A100 Coordinator until August 2005, when he became the course coordinator, having entered the Foreign Service with the 44th A100 class in 1998 as an administrative generalist. His previous assignments have been to Ankara as a human resource officer, The Hague as a supervisory general services officer, Majuro as regional administrative officer for Micronesia, London as administrative staff assistant, and Belgrade on a CON, general service officer rotation. A self-confessed army brat, Dinkelman was raised in many different places, but claims none of them as his hometown. He graduated from Brigham Young University with degrees in business and Spanish. The Foreign Service Language Test Unit maintains that Mr. Dinkelman speaks Spanish, Serbo-Croatian, Dutch, and Turkish. Prior to joining the Department of State, Dinkelman worked for the Communication Systems Division of Unisys in Salt Lake City. He and his wife, Liz, are the parents of 3 wonderful children. I have to mention, as I said before, that Mr. Dinkelman has been here to Provo for this workshop a number of times. This is a particular delight for us to have him be part of the Global Awareness Lecture Series to talk a little bit about an economic view on immigration, and a topic which obviously is an important topic, not only in the United States, but especially here in the Western United States, one that has an international dimension, but also a local dimension. Being up close in the consulate, running the consulate in Nogales, gives him just a very unique perspective, I believe, to talk about this subject, but also as a committed Latter-day Saint and as someone who has trained hundreds and hundreds of Foreign Service officers. It's the equivalent of meeting with the Dean of Admissions from a prestigious graduate school to find out how things work. And the insight and opportunity and personal experience and observations that we can glean from his visit, I think, are incalculable. So please join me today in welcoming Mr. John Dinkelman.
Thank you, Corey. I assure you all here that the joy and the benefit is mine and not yours. It is really, really a highlight of my year to come back here to BYU and speak at the Kennedy Center, and I thank you for your hospitality. Okay, we've all had it happen in our lives. We've gone somewhere, we've looked at something that we really wanted to purchase, we've turned it over, we've seen the price, and we've gone, ha! And we've put it back, right? Whether it's a car or just a can in the supermarket, our economist friends see that as a very healthy sign of an open, fair, and free market, where we as the purchaser have the opportunity to turn to the seller and say, "Sir, ma'am, I want your item. However, you are insane if you think I am going to pay that much money for it. I will walk away." Right? We call that highway robbery. And we joke about it between priesthood and Sunday school, or as we're talking on the phone with our friends. Can you believe they want this much? When I was in the Tucson airport flying up here just a few days ago, I saw The Economist. I really like The Economist. And my wife wants to buy The Economist, but I'm not paying $100 for a year of The Economist. I'm that cheap. But she wasn't in the airport, and I thought I can get away with this. So I took a copy of The Economist, and I look on the cover, and I see $4.95, $5.95 at the newsstand. And I go up there, and I hand it to the lady, and she tells me, "That'll be $7.50. And, in my Mormon passive-aggressive manner of manifesting anger, I simply didn't smile when I forked it over. Right? How dare she, right? And I enjoyed my Economist a little less on that flight coming up to Salt Lake. Well, in the past few months, I've had the opportunity to see highway robbery, where the opportunity cost of the purchase wasn't one less can of soda or one less bag of M&Ms, but rather it was people's lives. And it's happening daily on the deserts, both in the United States and just south of our border in our neighboring country, Mexico. And I'd like to speak about that today, because in the few months that I have been the consul in Nogales, Mexico, I have had a chance to have a world that has always been at my door opened up to me in ways that I never dreamed possible. And I think as understanding of what's going on south of our own borders and within our own country come to the knowledge of the people within the United States, we are better able to deal with it appropriately and act appropriately as individuals and as a nation in addressing what is one of the greatest issues to face us in the coming years. First, as always, I think it is best for you to be able to analyze what I say to know me a little bit more. So I'll quickly add to your kind and far too generous introduction, Corey. I'm a Latter-day Saint. I mean, that's part and parcel, actually, it's central to my existence. I'm a BYU graduate. I'm a Foreign Service officer with the United States Department of State. I am a father. I am a husband. I am the child of immigrants. My father was born in the Netherlands. My mother is the child of Italian immigrants. I like to say to people that less than 1 century ago, none of my ancestors was living in North America, speaking English, or in the LDS Church. And yet within 1 century, here I am representing, and here my family is living that American dream. We are believers in everything we are. I am the principal officer of the American Consulate in Nogales, Mexico. I am one of 9 principal officers, consuls and consuls general, at our various constituent posts to the American Embassy in Mexico City, ranging at cities, large cities like Monterrey and Guadalajara and Ciudad Juarez, to smaller towns like Mérida and, of course, my beloved Nogales. I am the little boy on a big block. I'm the baby of all of the consulates. I'm happy to be at that small little post just south of Tucson. Diplomatically speaking, I am directly subordinate to the ambassador in Mexico City. Bureaucratically speaking, there's a long chain between him and I of other individuals in the Foreign Service to help us get our job done. However, as far as LDS people go, although it is very difficult to ascertain the religious preferences of people in federal service, I have not been able to identify anybody who has been a Latter-day Saint in any of these 10 jobs, either the chief of mission in Mexico City or the consuls or consuls general located throughout Mexico before me prior to J. Reuben Clark, who, as he finished service as the ambassador to Mexico over 60 years ago, left to join the first presidency of the church. I will continue to study that, though, because I can't believe that somebody hasn't been a member of the church in one of these 10 positions over the past more than half a century. Referring to my notes here very quickly. I'll go into a little bit more about my responsibilities when we bring up some maps, because I think it'll be easier for you to understand what is going on from my point of view. But I wanted to bring some statistics to view. And Corey, if I could ask you, could you grab that large booklet there? I failed to get out my references. What's the old line, folks? Be prepared. And I am not. As you know, Mexico is a nation, as you should know, Mexico is a nation of over 100 million people, 1/3 our size. According to some estimates, there are up to 12 million Mexicans living in the United States. That number rings very popular for many different purposes in the United States. However, depending on sources, about 7 million of those 12 million are actually here in less than legitimate status, shall we say, unauthorized. Conversely, however, were you aware that there are more Americans living in Mexico than in any other country on the face of the earth, with approximately 400,000 American citizens residing in Mexico. At any given time, however, there are over 1 million Americans in Mexico, tourists, businessmen, whatever the case might be, with 600,000 of those people in Mexico City. Think of that. Although Mexico, particularly in this case of this study that I'm referencing, Cancun is the most popular destination outside the United States for Americans to visit, with some 4 million citizens visiting that city every year. But at the same time, the United States is by far the #1 tourist destination for Mexicans. Catch this number, it surprises me. With nearly 210 million entries into the United States every year by Mexican citizens. Legitimate. That's Mexicans entering the United States to do whatever they want. Let me continue on. I just wanted to bring some other things to get this into perspective. Unfortunately, for me, not all of those Mexicans who want to enter the United States are doing it legally. And unfortunately for me, my job is to try to stem that tide of people who want to get into the United States illegally before they actually get there. I'm the person on the other side of the border with the large stop sign in the middle of the desert saying, no, no, go back, do this correctly. And it is incumbent upon me to make the public relations effort to work with the media, to work with the Mexican population just south of our border, to enlist them to force multiply, to societally make it unacceptable for people to enter a foreign country illegally. Because the more success I have in the grassroots of stemming a tide, the less effort needs to be made in apprehending and returning the 1.1 million people who are found every year of Mexican origin illegal in the United States. Try to imagine the effort that goes into the movement of such numbers of people north of the border. Now, there'll be a lot of times I'll be referencing things. I'll use the term illegal. I'll use the term unauthorized. I know all of these terms right now. It's such a hot topic that people may be offended. They may be concerned about the way things are used. Frankly, on a personal level, I feel any of the titles, whether it is illegal or unauthorized, are applicable. An individual who has entered another country without the permission of that country, I think deserves whatever term that country wants to give them. As a consul of the United States on the border, I try to make it clear to the individuals with whom I work that I support in no way an American entering the Republic of Mexico without the concurrence of the government of the Republic of Mexico, no less than I do the entry of a Mexican into the United States outside the parameters established by our own government. Let's go to the map. Let's talk a little bit. And if I can, point back, correct? That did it. Now, Corey tells me that I am not to leave the podium because I am being filmed. So if any of you see me move any further than here, throw something at me, and that way Corey will be happy. Of course, we have a map here of the Republic of Mexico. The border of over 2,000 miles runs from San Diego, Tijuana. How many of you have ever crossed the border between San Diego and Tijuana? Okay. How many of you have ever crossed the Mexican-American border at any location? Please raise your hands. I dare say that this is the most crossed border by everyone in this room. This is the most crossed border in the world, with upwards of 350,000 people moving across it every day. Okay? Running 2,000 miles to Brownsville, Matamoros on the Gulf Coast. We have American consulates or consulates general at Juarez, Tijuana, Nuevo Laredo, Matamoros, and at my dear Nogales, which doesn't even merit a place on the map, right? My responsibility for my consular district is the northern half of the state of Sonora, never further in than roughly about 80 miles from the southern Arizona border. The border between Sonora and Chihuahua roughly lands at the border at the same point where the border between Arizona and New Mexico lies. So my concern is essentially extremely southern Arizona. How many of you are Arizonans? Okay. My Arizonan friends, you are my biggest problem and my biggest benefit. Right? How many of you have ever heard of a lovely little place called Puerto Penasco or Rocky Point? Okay? Our Arizonans in the room say, never heard of Puerto Penasco, but I know Rocky Point. Arizona's beach is the Gulf of California. It's 3 hours from Phoenix, and it's essentially a burgeoning tourist center with very large high-rise hotels offering the people of the desert state something they usually don't get, and that's an ocean view. And it only costs them a drive into Mexico of about 50 miles to get to the coast. Unlike all of my colleagues at different consulates and consulates general around Mexico, my friend in Merida, who handles all of the 4 million I spoke about going to Cancun, my friend in Tijuana, who handles hundreds of thousands of Americans in Baja California, and my friends in nicer places, such as, I can't find it, there it is, Acapulco, Veracruz, Mazatlan. The Americans who come into my consular district are coming in by car. They don't fly to their locations in Cabo San Lucas or Cancun. They drive. They're not coming on expensive junkets. They're coming on the cheap and on the fly. Unlike my colleagues at other points along the border covering cross-border transportation and transit, my consular district is in charge of overseeing what is continually an increasing percentage of the amount of food, the importation of the amount of food that you are eating here in the United States each day. Today, at the Port of Nogales, over 950 semi-trucks will cross with fresh produce coming from the very rich and abundant fields of the northern part of Sinaloa and the southern part of the state of Sonora. In the wintertime, as it gets colder here in the north, this number of trucks will increase to a high point in January and February of over 1,800 semi-trucks a day, bringing fresh produce to your supermarkets. This amounts to an annual percentage of somewhere between 45 and 65% of all the fresh vegetables that are eaten north of the Rio Grande. My colleagues in the other ports oversee ports of entry that principally import manufactured goods, vehicles, electronics, and many other things that are products of the North America Free Trade Agreement. Since its inception in 1994, United States imports into Mexico have increased 294%. Mexican imports into the United States have increased 400%. The ties between these two nations, our two nations, are so strong that I dare say nothing will be able to decrease the continued interaction and strengthening of the bonds between these two very large and very powerful nations. So what does this mean for our future? Well, I'll leave it to the economists and I'll leave it to the social scientists to determine what will happen. I want to address what's going on right now and what I see from my side of the border. Drugs, big issue. Everybody's always thinking about it. Illegal aliens, big issue. Everyone's talking about it. Every day you open the paper, there's something about either one. Mexico plays a prime role in each. For reasons that are many and varied, Mexico has become the major route through which both illegal drugs and illegal immigration are coming into the United States. Our government recognizes this, and our government has dealt with it, in my opinion, quite effectively over the past few years. We have strengthened our border controls along the Texas border and along the California border, because these were the two locations through which the majority of products were coming in and the majority of people were being trafficked. It was, whoops, ooh, I've done wrong, forgive me, okay. The presence of the Rio Grande River and a definable border which we could strengthen and we could monitor. Water, whether it was running in it or not, helped us quite a bit to delineate and focus our efforts to control movement across that border. The presence of considerably organized and well-equipped drug cartels in the eastern part of Mexico also fostered movement of drugs into Texas. Similarly, in Baja California Norte, going into Southern California, an excessive amount of illicit human trafficking and drug trafficking was coming in. Our colleagues in the Department of Homeland Security doubled their efforts and have strengthened and pushed, similar to the effects of squeezing a balloon, have pushed Texas and California to the point where the drug cartels themselves, the human trafficking enterprises, have determined it is simply easier to move than to try to get through the barriers in California and Texas. Naturally, it has fallen on me in my 300-mile consular district along the state of Arizona to see an influx in both movement of people and movement of drugs. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware now of the efforts that the United States government is making by building a border fence in order to curtail this and contain this. It's been very interesting for me in the past few months to be briefed on this and to understand more what our government's efforts are. I am encouraged by what I'm seeing. I am discouraged by what I have seen going on south of the border. I am pained to the point of concern about the social and economic effects which illegal immigration and drug trafficking are having on our fellow North Americans south of the border. As the United States' efforts to control the border in in Arizona and on the border with Sonora become stronger, what we will undoubtedly see south of the border are social pressures and movements, continuations of trends south of the border that are going to adversely affect Mexican society. We in the United States have a vested interest in the stability of our neighbors. Any of you who have ever lived in an apartment building and have had to listen to your neighbors arguing or fighting next door know how disconcerting it is. Our Mexican neighbors and friends are central to our peaceful existence in North America, and it is in our national interest to make sure that Mexican authorities and the Mexican population have the tools that they need to work through the difficult challenges that they have ahead of them. For the purposes of this discussion today, I want to talk about my state of Sonora. I want to talk about what I have gone through over the past 3 months and seen and benefited from as my eyes have been open to what's going on just south of Phoenix, Tucson, Yuma, Douglas, and those areas. Arizonans, can you please raise your hands once again? Where are you from? Gilbert, just outside of Phoenix. Next person. Flagstaff, a little bit up to the north where it gets cold. Where else, Arizonans? There are only 2 hands? Mesa, Mormon colony, right here. Right. Latter-day Saints settled all the way down to the border. And even to this day, the Mormon colonies in western Chihuahua and, what I didn't realize until earlier, eastern Sonora, which no longer exist, were areas where 100 years ago, 120 years ago, Latter-day Saints settled as Brigham Young sent them to colonize these areas. Even the Mormon Battalion. I have the joy of actually having about 15 miles of the Mormon Battalion's trail in my consular district. So I look forward to the opportunity to study that a little bit more, talk with Mexicans, and find out if they've got any history that they can add to our knowledge. But what's going on there today? About a week after I arrived, my friends in the Border Patrol, they offered me a ride in a helicopter. They let me get on one of their choppers and fly across much of this border to get a bird's eye view of what was going on down in the desert. Have any of you ever had an ant hill in your backyard? Have any of you ever taken the time to sit and watch the ants? Have you noticed that in the grass that the ants have walked through, that they make paths? And eventually they can ruin the grass if there's enough of them. But they will mark their path and lead the way back to the colony, to the hive, to the anthill. As I flew across the desert, more specifically, as I flew across the mountains between the deserts, I was reminded of the time when I was a small child and played outside in the backyard and watched the ants. Throughout the mountains of southern Arizona, there are trails that are marked that I certainly would never see if I were walking on the ground. But it is evident from not only the footpaths, but the garbage and trash that has been littered throughout our deserts, that people are moving across this border in unheard of numbers. As one gets over the desert areas where vegetation is not so abundant, where freedom of movement's a little less inhibited, you start to see vehicle tracks. And I'm not talking about the errant little, ATV that's running across the desert. I'm talking about large half-ton pickup type vehicles that run at speeds of 80 to 90 miles an hour through the desert, laden with drugs, moving as fast as they can with no lights in the middle of the night to hook up with somebody on the north end to distribute products that undoubtedly every one of you has encountered in your high schools once or twice in the past 5 or 10 years. It is pernicious, and it goes on daily. As I have worked with the individuals in the Border Patrol, I have seen just how much those individuals are doing and how grateful we as a nation should be to them for what seems to be the impossible job of securing such a long border in such inhospitable conditions. I was surprised. I was impressed. I still was uninformed until I took the time with my own staff to leave Nogales and drive south into Sonora, west into the desert, and to start following the path of illegal immigration. And I guess that's the key of what I wanted to speak in the remaining minutes that I have to talk to you about, was the run through the desert that individuals are making. There is a small town in northern Sonora at the southern tip of what we would consider the desert called Altar. Altar is a backwater where really nothing should exist. It has a population nominally of around 2,000 people. However, on any given day, there are about 5,000 to 6,000 people in Altar. They arrive on scores of buses, and as you sit in Altar and watch, as I did, you will see, literally, it's as if it were a major bus terminal with large what we would call Greyhound-style bus transport companies, labeled Mexico City, Altar, Guadalajara, Altar, Monterrey, Altar, Oaxaca, Altar, bringing people from all of these major population centers in central and southern Mexico all the way up to this desert point where no one lives. Why would they do that? The individuals get out of their buses, and interestingly enough, in Altar, I counted over 42 stores, a veritable mall, that sell just one set of products: black backpacks, black sweaters, black shirts, black sweatpants, black tennis shoes, black hats. Why do they do this? Well, you see, the Mexicans are good businessmen. Any of you who have ever gone south of the border one afternoon to buy things know that Mexicans know business. They do a good job. They see a market and they fill a demand. And the legal demand of Mexicans to buy black clothing in Altar, Mexico is something that has not gone unchecked. And these individuals who come from all parts of Mexico and Central America, these are not just Mexicans coming through here, are purchasing clothing and equipping themselves for a travel, sometimes a week's worth of walking across our southwestern desert to get to the United States and to a better life for themselves. So they sell these things to them in Altar. There are dozens of places where they can take accommodation for a night. Of course, when I go through these locations, everyone is aware of it, and I don't get to see the activity because everything closes up shop for the official American going through. But the evidence is there. And so in Altar, as they sit, outfitted in black clothing, slept for the night with MREs and rations in their backpacks and enough water to go north, what do? Well, they certainly don't start walking from there. Altar has its own transportation service with 40 or 50 vans, usually very large Chevy Econoline type vans, that have had all the seats taken out of them and have just had benches stuck horizontally within these vans. 30 to 40 individuals cram into a van and they take off north from Altar, legitimately. Interestingly enough, the owners of the land between Altar and the Arizona border, a small town called Sasabe, have actually made a road, a dirt road, a toll road, where you in your Econoline van, running about 80 to 90 miles an hour with 40 people in it, will pay a toll to use this private road that will get you within 10 miles of the border. These individuals are then delivered to a small place about 7-10 miles south of the border, known as the Brickyard, La Ladrillera, where they are then left, and of course I will never see it because it's illicit and it closes down whenever I get near it. The famed, or I should say infamous, coyotes are present and ready to make the deal for these individuals to pay them the money to get them across the border. There's where it starts to get ugly. There's where these individuals who have come from locations in the tropics, who have never seen a desert, who have no idea what the principle of dehydration is, much less ever having seen humidity less than 70%, are left to fend for themselves with individuals whose only concern is to take all the money they possibly can off of them. Depending on the agreement they enter into, sometimes they enter into multiple agreements where they agree to pay the coyote a certain amount of money, running around $2,000 to $3,000 at this time, to get them across. And if they're caught, the coyote agrees to give them 1, 2, 3 more shots, a guarantee for services rendered. Roving bandits, of course, through these areas where these individuals find themselves, these victims find themselves roving themselves, looking for a way to get to the cities to the north, usually end up taking whatever's left on these people if they don't stay together and stick together as they try to move to the north. Mexican government officials are concerned about these people. The rights and the safety of the migrant population is close to the heart of the Mexican people. It sings to them. It calls to them. And the Mexican government has rightfully responded. An entire group of Mexican government authorities is in charge of caring for these migrants, advising them what kind of plants are edible and what are not, what to do when apprehended by American authorities, what to do when bitten by scorpions or rattlesnakes, where to lie, how to hide, how not to die when they go into the United States. But there's only so much they can do for their own people who continually push to get across that border. There's a large mountain directly north of Sasabe on the Todo Odham Indian Reservation. It is called Baboquivari, and it is directly north and the perfect reference point for these immigrants as they try to move to either Phoenix or Tucson and water. They are told to follow that mountain and do all they can to get north, for if they go away from that mountain, they will surely die, and they will die. The desert is an inhospitable place for them to be, much less anyone from the area who knows desert Arizona knows well enough what to do and what not to do. The coyotes drop these people on the north side of the border. At the first sign of any problems, the coyotes abandon them, and if they are lucky, they find themselves in the custody of the border patrol and removed to water, to relative safety, and eventual repatriation into Mexico. Those who are not so fortunate, who are still making the run, both at daytime to their peril, or at nighttime as they can see the loom of Tucson or Phoenix in the distance, and they move through the desert at night, their fate is not yet sealed, and they cling to the hope that they can make it to population and then hide themselves in the large population centers and eventually go to wherever their final destination is. The economy that is built around the movement of these scores of thousands of people a month who are coming through Arizona will shortly be stymied. As the border fence which is being constructed, and I have watched it being built, it is not a picket fence. It is not a wall, as many people would say. It is a long row of concrete-filled metal barriers about 20 feet high, with about 4 to 5 inches between the posts, and it will run for miles in either direction of populated areas. Where in unpopulated areas such a fence won't exist, the construction of what is most reminiscent to me of tank traps that we saw in war. If you've watched a World War II movie and seen Normandy, you see the railroad ties, or the railroad irons that are placed in X's to stop large vehicles from moving. Those are being placed to stop these vehicles from running the desert and getting into the United States. It's a necessary fact that we have to secure the border. As I sat at the Mexican checkpoint about 10 miles south of the border and watched for a half an hour these vans going so fast across the desert, each with 30 to 40 people in them, I also saw a disturbing thing. I saw many trucks with no one in them, but fully laden with things, covered up, running just as fast to the north. At one point, I saw a semi going what I estimate to be 75 miles an hour on a desert road, make a right turn down a small little teeny goat path and disappear behind a mountain. I leave it to you to determine what was in that semi-truck. It's coming north. And as that wall fence inhibits these horrible individuals from selling their product in the north, they will turn to the economic reality of having to convert their product to cash. And if they can't sell it in the United States, they will begin to sell it in Mexico. We have already seen along the border and in all of Mexico to an extent, a great increase in the amount of drug usage among the Mexican population. This will get even worse. We see in Mexico a continued attempt to erode the police forces, to compromise the press and the journalists, efforts on the part of drug lords and cartels to literally take over any facet of Mexican society which stands in their way of the immense profits that their products will bring them from the United States. As the United States closes off these doors more and more, our friends south of the border will be even more arm in arm with us in fighting against this pernicious plague that is drugs. We need to be there for them. The President has introduced an aid package last week of over $500 million for this coming fiscal year to help Mexican authorities to deal with what will undoubtedly be a plague of drug issues that will confront their country. When I speak to LDS audiences, I have freedom to use a term that otherwise would not work to express what I see going on in Mexico and the threat our Mexican friends are facing. I use the term gadianton because what we see going on down there mimics what went on during Book of Mormon times, where entire social systems, entire nations in this case, are threatened by lawlessness and compromise of the very systems they rely upon to exist. The Mexican people are resilient. The Mexican people are wonderful. And over the coming years, as the United States continues to strengthen its ability to control our borders, we need to assist the Mexican people and their government in fighting a battle which will have essentially moved from our own cities further south. We cannot abandon their efforts, because if they can succeed, then we together can continue to help to eradicate the scourge of drugs and human trafficking from the borders of our own country, our neighbors, and ideally this entire continent and hemisphere. It is now 10 minutes to. I'll open up to any questions. I recognize that many of you have to get to your next class, so don't feel bad if you need to run out. Yes?
Dink, if you could wait for the mics.
Oh, we'll wait for the microphones so that your questions can be recorded. Please tell me your name and where you're from as you stand up and ask your question. I think there was one right here.
Okay.
Keep your hand up so that nice lady can give you your mic.
See you first.
Right there.
All right.
I wanted to know how accurately informed are prospective illegals as to the rewards, costs, and risks of such a journey?
Well, that's my job. And I can't tell you how they have been, but I can tell you what our efforts are now in making sure that migrants, whatever their nationality, recognize the difficulties that are ahead. There is a constant stream of public relation campaigns that we are implementing throughout Mexico and other Central American countries, not only explaining that they are contemplating doing something which is illegal, but more importantly, in my opinion, that there are methods that they can accomplish the same goal without breaking the law. There is already a visa for individuals who would like to come to the United States and temporarily work. They just don't realize that. One of the things that I'm contemplating doing in Nogales is actually going to the border and having a small little business card type thing and handing it to them as they are being repatriated across the border back into my side of Nogales, saying to them, look, you don't have to be a criminal. You don't have to do this. Go back, work through the necessary systems, and come to the United States as a legal temporary worker. No one is going to debate that we need temporary workers in the United States to do the job and support our economy that they are doing. We appreciate their contributions. Frankly, we live on immigration in this country. But we have to have it in a way that must be legitimate and correct. And the key is letting this population understand this. Yes? Sure. What's your name?
I'm Darren Jackson. I'm from Ashburn, Virginia.
Okay.
You're speaking of
the legal opportunities for these immigrants to come into the country, what is the feasibility for the majority of those people to actually get that visa or that approval to cross the border? I mean, would you say that the majority of them can get it within a period of a year, or what are the ramifications for the majority?
Well, the honest answer is the majority of them will never get it because we have limitations of numbers. That can be said of any classification of visa. If everyone who wanted to come to the United States came to the United States, I think half the earth would be in the United States. We have self-imposed limits, which, for obvious reasons, we support. But the question I would pose to them is, would you prefer a 100% chance of being a fugitive or a smaller chance of being legitimate with a path to honorably support your family and presumably repeatedly be able to come to the United States on an H-1B visa, or excuse me, H-2B visa, and do the work with an employer whom you trust rather than paying a coyote to get you into something that will always be tenuous? Yes.
Hi, my name is Scott Gimmel. I'm from San Diego, California.
San Diego, a border town.
Yes. I was wondering, those that you bring back that come through and then they try to cross the borders again, what happens then?
They are presumably located again and sent back once again.
Is there nothing else that you do to, I mean, I guess also, what is my question, and what does Mexico do to those people after they've been brought back?
Well, they've not committed a Mexican crime. To accuse someone of leaving one's country of a crime would be akin to something that we know of in communist states. And the Mexican government, and I can't speak for the Mexican government, of course, but I find it, as an American citizen, it would be distasteful for us to penalize an American who ever wanted to leave the United States. And so they are under no penalties, to my knowledge, for attempting to enter the United States without documentation.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hi, I have two questions. First of all, I'm from Ecuador originally, and I would like to know, I know that there's a lot of Ecuadorian people that in our crisis times, back in the 90s, they left the country and they use Mexico and they cross Mexico. Yes. I would like to I have two questions, so could you please answer that question? Have you find Ecuadorian citizens crossing the border? I would like to be aware of those things.
Okay, the first question, yes, there are citizens from virtually all nations who attempt to cross the Mexican border into the United States without authorization. It is a common path to be taken. The greatest concern that the United States has, of course, is for those individuals who don't just want economic security that the United States has to offer, but who want to do us harm. And this is a new dimension that since September 11th, 2001, has added the importance of us to focus on this border, because we know that millions of people want to come to the United States simply because of what America has to offer. What we are concerned about are those who want to take what we have to offer away from everybody in violent attack.
That's a great answer.
And your second question?
Yeah, my second question is, I grew up in New York, so I was in September 11 time, and I know exactly how, what it is to be in a place, Now, my question is, being in New York and growing up in New York, I remember the mobster there, the mafia there. It's really hard. How is the FBI, or how are the agencies in the United States working against drugs and against, trying to fight this plague of drugs? I mean, New York City did a great job. 42th Street used to be a really bad place. Now Giuliani really cleaned up the whole place, and is a lot more safety. And how is this applicable to the whole nation? Is the United States really cleaning up of their drugs? I mean, I know it's a question probably not just about immigration, but how is this related immigration to the agencies that are working against drugs?
Okay. I'll answer your question as best I can. I don't represent the FBI or my colleagues in law enforcement in this venue. However, I lump it all together. Illegality is illegality. Someone smuggling a person into the United States probably wouldn't mind smuggling drugs into the United States too. Somebody who has a person in human slavery and is selling them as a sex slave in Florida probably has no problem with transporting an AK-47 in the same car. You don't have picky criminals. Once you've sold your soul to the devil, it really doesn't matter what you're doing anymore. So I put all of this into the same package and believe that our resources are most effectively spent in controlling it all on a macro level, on the national level, with the FBI and other agencies and departments looking to defend the nation as a whole and relying, as you pointed out, on local law enforcement ability and local individuals. Right? We're never going to win a war on drugs unless the people themselves don't fight this war. I mean, I know this sounds corny. I know this sounds altruistic. But unless we have millions upon millions of mothers and fathers in this country who will have nothing of their child even starting with marijuana, right, we will not be able to stop the use of cocaine. You know, this is not something where just one day a child wakes up and says, I think I'm going to go freebase. This is something that is built up. And as long as an attitude in the society is one that is permissive towards it, we will have a continued challenge. So as law enforcement agencies work on the macro level, and as the people of a nation work on the demand side of the house, this is the only way that we can together work to succeed in this. Unfortunately, I foresee that our southern neighbors will now start to see that not only is this a supply issue of things moving through their country, but that their very children will also start to be affected by the use of these drugs.